All right, well, welcome everybody to our webinar for December 2022. This is one that we are doing as part of our How They Did It series that we are calling Global Operations Unified into One Centralized System. So definitely very excited to share this story. This is one that we have had for a long time and are very proud of. And just a quick note about logistics, anybody that has any questions throughout, please feel free to use the Q&A answer field over there, and I'll try and get to any of the questions as we're going through the presentation. If we can't get into any, I do have some time at the end of it in order to try and answer some questions there at the end. So the first thing that I would like to do is to introduce our guest. So Alberto, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Colin. My name is Alberto Q. I'm an IT manager at Flowserve. Been at Flowserve for a little over 12 years now in different roles, and I've started using Appian about 9-10 years ago. And in this webinar, we'll talk a little bit about our journey, about how we started and how we have grown our applications since then.
Great, thank you. And then a little bit about us at Macedon Technologies and just some context about exactly how we got here. So, my name is Colin Schoenfelder. I'm the Director of Technology with Macedon. I've been around for around 11 years now, maybe going on 12, something. And this is actually a really exciting one for me because I worked with Flowserve with Alberto years ago on some parts of this project. So it's a really fun story to get to tell and something that we've seen a lot of evolution with over time. I'm joined by Andrew Grumman, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, Andy Grumman. I'm our VP of Professional Services over here at Macedon. I oversee all of our consulting engagements and all of our solutions delivery. And I'm also very invested in this one. I've been working with Flowserve personally for just a few months shy of 10 years now. So this is one of our best and oldest and favorite customers. It's really cool that they get to tell their story on this webinar today, Alberto.
Yeah. And, like I was saying, at Macedon, we've done a lot of different engagements for a lot of different clients, a lot of different projects. And really, that doesn't just, focus onto one particular industry area. We have a lot of different industries that we have done work with. We have a lot of different types of applications that we have built out. And so this theory or this webinar is really, and the series that's in part of, is really intended to kind of showcase how that journey goes. So when people are starting to get interested in, automation technologies, how does that conversation go and, land on, which technology that they are going to use? How do they go about choosing a vendor? And then really that whole process of trying to come up with the initial set of challenges that you're trying to meet, and then the process of building out software which is going to meet those challenges, rolling it out, and then seeing ROI, longer term. So very excited to have, Alberto here to kind of talk through some of that process. And without further ado, I'll stop sharing and we can really just kind of jump into some of the questions that I had for you. And so first of all, Alberto, I'd love it if you would just give a little bit of context about, your industry and, what Flowserve's offerings are, and just kind of give just some general business context about that.
Sure, Colin. So Flowserve is a global leader in flow control solutions with a legacy dating back over 200 years now. We have over 15,000 associates across 15 different countries, serving many different industries, including water, solar, oil, gas, power, and chemical. We manufacture pumps, valves, and seals, and help our customers tackle their toughest flow control challenges. So a few examples of things that we have done. We have helped a customer provide solutions for customers include things like providing fresh drinking water, help provide flow control solutions, things like flood management systems, reduce carbon emissions, and also enable energy transitions.
Great, yeah, and I definitely, back in the day when we were going out to site visits for Flowserve, for sure the equipment that is being built is very impressive. I remember going out and seeing huge warehouses with like pumps and different types of equipment that's an entire warehouse floor tall. So it's very difficult, manufacturing equipment in order to deal with the heavy process and how the work is going to get done. And I suppose in this space with manufacturing, that's a somewhat similar problem. But what were some of the initial challenges that you were experiencing with the kinds of work that you were doing that led you towards, I suppose, automation more generally, and like, the initial kind of foray into trying to get more, connections and automation into your system, and then sort of what drove you towards Appian at the beginning of that process?
So I will say that there was, or I should say there is always a need to increase visibility and transparency of what we do as a company. So we are one company, but we, like I mentioned, we're across 50 different countries, and that counts for hundreds of different facilities. And it was very difficult to share information because first of all, cloud-based solutions were very, rare back in the days. Everyone was storing information on shared drives, through emails, filing cabinets, and everyone was essentially working in silos. So we had one company, but a lot of independent silos that the left hand did not know what the right hand was doing. That type of situation. Mm-hmm. So there was a need to more specifically to be able to capture repair history and be able to share our repair process across the company. And that's kind of what the scenario was at that time. We had a couple of situations where our customers will come to us to different QRCs. QRCs are quick response centers, and they might be asking for a repair or a service from us. And each of our QRCs might give them a different answer on what the repair scope is going to be, and ultimately, how much it's going to cost to do the repair. So there was a very strong executive sponsorship and leadership back then that basically wanted to provide a more visible and transparent system that we're able to go into a central place to be able to see this type of information. So that was really what really drove us to look at different tools back then. We weren't specifically looking at Appian per se during the initial phases, but as we looked into what we really needed, we started looking at things that Appian was offering, the VPM capabilities, that ability to digitalize what we do today through email and Excel sheets. And ultimately, that's kind of how we got started with our Appian journey.
Yeah, and I think, it was definitely a fascinating project when we were first getting started with it, because of the fact that it was a very worldwide, organization that had a lot of different challenges to kind of meet with that context in mind. Can you talk maybe a little bit more specifically about, how that played into it? Like the fact that you had different places and different time zones, and you had, teams that were not located in the same place, and, how that kind of played into both the challenges that you had and, some of the considerations that you had when you were starting to do that kind of a project and, introducing automation.
Yeah, so part of that is just the global nature of our company. Mm-hmm. We do have presence across the world in basically every single time zone. So when working through the project, that is just a variable that we just had to factor in. But aside from just the time zone piece or facilities, I guess let me backtrack a little bit and talk about maybe some of the challenges that we had when we were rolling this out. And I can break it up into two pieces. Maybe that's a little bit easier to explain. One side of it was on the technology side, challenges that we had. So as we're rolling this out, as I mentioned earlier, cloud was still a very fresh thing, at least for us as a company. So our infrastructure was not ready for something like Appian, which was a browser-based solution. So I still remember, back in days, Andy, you probably remember this, that we had to
buying hotspots.
We literally had hotspots that we had to carry with us because our network was set up to work well with our internal applications, but not with like a web browser application. Mm-hmm. So That was one of the more obvious things, but the way that we have set our infrastructure and everything, had to keep that in mind, where we had to factor in that the facilities that we were going into where we're not we had to upgrade the infrastructure as we went. So that's something that from an infrastructure standpoint, technology standpoint, was a very interesting challenge that we might not see as common today, but it was definitely one of the things that we saw before. But then in terms of like actual challenge in rolling it out, I will say that nothing really beats the change management part.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what we're changing, right? Like ultimately, as long as you're changing something, people are not going to be happy. It's just human nature that we're just averse to change. So one of the things that we went out and did with this project was to standardize the process across the world. So we started with North America first, and then we slowly went to the different regions. Each region had their own systems, have their own processes, has their own way of doing things, their own ways of tracking their KPIs, for example. And we were getting them onboarded into this one central system that no matter how small, it is different than what they do today. So being able to roll this out and in a fashion that will encourage them to utilize the system was definitely a challenge in the beginning. We did a lot of in-person rollouts and a lot of training and also retraining to make sure that people are comfortable with it. People are comfortable with using the technology, and people are comfortable with sharing their information on a cloud environment.
Yeah, and absolutely. That was something that, I very much remember being a really great approach that, stuck with me on how, software can be delivered. There's a lot of people who, have sort of the base instinct of, okay, well, if we are going to roll out this, one unified system, let's build it all to, trying to get as much information about the different processes as we can, do all of the change management up front, and then sort of roll out this large application to the entire organization, be it a global organization or be it something which is, more localized than that, which is definitely the most difficult way to do it. The way that Flowserve approached it by sort of taking in, I might be wrong about the number, but I seem to remember it was something like 28 service centers, that like worldwide that they were, kind of going through, rolling it out, the system out to one of them, getting some feedback, us going through and doing the training, incorporating that feedback into, the application, then kind of going live with it. It seemed like it was a much, smoother way of, delivering that application. Is that sort of how you saw it when you were going through it, and how did that sort of approach come about at the beginning?
Yeah, so we knew from the early stages that change management was going to be one of the toughest areas. We started, like you said, with a pretty defined scope, selected QRCs. And even within that list of QRCs, we prioritize it in a way that we tackle the ones that were more open-minded to change, and the ones that we knew had leadership in place that we had confidence in them to be able to propagate this change across the enterprise. So we started QRC we went from one QRC to another QRC in the beginning in a slow roll type of schedule. And the first QRC that we selected, we knew that the general manager there had a very strong background at Flowserve and was able to provide us some feedback on what we have built, so that we don't want to build something and roll it out to everyone and be like, learn that it doesn't work. So we rolled it out to the initial QRCs. We got some feedback. We started to take that feedback and make some improvements to the process, make sure that it is solid, and then use that blueprint for the other QRCs after that.
Gotcha. And so, that was something, you talked about how each one of them had sort of their own processes that they were using in order to track, the same types of work going through. And, I know that part of that was the different integrations, where people were storing their data, what kinds of, systems that they needed to integrate to get pieces of information. Maybe can you talk a little bit about, the types of integrations that we needed to do when we were building out the system, and how you kind of approached that process, also just bringing in all of the different pieces of information that were needed through the life cycle of one of these repairs, just like how that was kind of approached in integrating.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because that is definitely an area that I think Appian really shines, because as our technology landscape is fairly complex. We already have many systems that is used for things like or install base, things for customer information, etc. We did not want to rebuild something that was working. So our purpose was not to really rebuild those pieces that were working in the company, that were already being used by other parts of the company. For example, or install base, right? That's something that our original equipment side of the business will be feeding information in, and we really just want to take that information and feed it into into a repair workflow. So so what we did is we laid out a workflow and figured out the different pieces of information that we needed. So in the initial sets, if I remember correctly, it was things like our install base, so that we knew the history of the equipment, our customer information, our bill materials, pricing, and be able to send information to our ERP. So that was really our initial set of foundational information that we need to bring in, and we built that out. We built that process. We use web services. Back then it was BizTalk, and nowadays we use Boomi as our middleware to be able to connect these internal systems, pull the information that we need, not everything, just information that we need for that repair workflow, and then leverage that information through the whole workflow. And since then, as we have rolled out a system globally, this goes back to what I was saying about as we went to each different region or site, there might be some different systems that we need to connect to. So for example, or ERP landscape or order system, basically. The system that we might be using in North America will be different than the one that we use in Europe. So Appian really allowed us to not have to change the workflow to do that. We just have to change how we got the information, or what information we had to send to those systems. So from a site in North America and a site in Europe, they might be following the same workflow that we have built. It's just that we have swapped out the integration so that they are getting the information they may need from the system that they use today.
Yeah, and I'm curious kind of a little bit about that decision-making process. Like you were talking about not wanting to, replace systems that were working. At some point, like you are building out, custom software. How did you kind of decide whether or not something was something that you wanted to rebuild in Appian or, in a new software versus, reuse? Is that something that you continue to reevaluate as time goes on? So
we do continue to reevaluate that anytime we encounter those situations, those questions. But I would say that even in the early stages, like we had in mind, or we have mapped out the overall roadmap of where we wanted to go with, and things like for example, customer information, right? Like we used to have a legacy system that was that we use to manage our opportunities, information about our customers, things like that, or quotes and things like that. And when we were beginning a project, we knew that, hey, this was something that we might, it's on the roadmap of the enterprise landscape or our overall IT strategy to be replaced. So even though there was a need for something newer, we want to make sure that we were aligned with our IT strategy, that we knew that in a few years from now we'll replace that piece of software, which we did with Salesforce eventually, and nowadays we are connecting to Salesforce for that piece of information.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think, kind of an additional layer to complexity on top of that is that, a lot of the systems that you needed to integrate with, like, I remember there was also a lot of like language, considerations as well. Some of the systems are going to be, delivering part information and different, like router information in one language versus another. Was that another, like, how did you tackle that challenge, I suppose, just in the fact that it's a worldwide, organization?
So in general, that wasn't that big of a problem for us, just because we are even though we are a global company in many different regions, at the end of the day, we are a company that primary language will be English. So with that said, there are definitely sites that will have preferred their local languages, but the critical piece for us was our customer-facing documents. So we need to make sure that our customers are receiving the documents that they need, whether it is the as-found report or the inspection report, that it will be in the language they need. So that piece was definitely something that we built out something within Appian to be able to do the translations for. But in terms of being able to get that data for the actual workflow, that wasn't that big of an issue for us.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, I mean, at this point, as Andy mentioned, you were mentioning, you've been using the system for a long period of time, right? Or like around 10 years or so. And I know that the initial line of business that you were focusing around is around, the pump line of business. And since that was rolled out, to all of the global service centers, what would you say has been sort of the experience with regard to, just the outcomes of that? Were there things that you were using more like granularly to measure outcomes, or was it something that which was a little bit more, kind of fuzzy in terms of, measuring, success? And then, how did, end users react to it? Did you find that it was, now that it's been rolled out for a long time, that people embraced it well? Was it something which, you had to continue to iterate on? And just kind of talk about that a little bit.
So, our initial scope, as I mentioned earlier, was really around the ability to capture repair history and be able to put it in a central location that we can do analytics on. And that perspective, we have achieved that goal. We have one place to go to look at repair history. Over the years, we have also created different dashboards with more recently with things like Power BI, for example, to be able to analyze that data. So today, something that we couldn't do before, that we can do today, for example, we'll be able to look at our repair centers across the world and be able to look at how they're performing in terms of our DCIQ metric. And our DCIQ metric is basically our from the start when we receive the equipment all the way to the cycle time of how long it takes us to get the quotation out to our customer. And that's something that we're able to provide the data to our business so that they can create Power BI dashboards to track this information nowadays. With that said, it is a bit of an iterative process in terms of process standardization. So one of the things that came out of this project is that we have provided a platform to encourage standardization. So we built out the first iteration, and over the years we have iterated over it. And some of it is driven by people seeing opportunities to improve. And other things are, there might be new requirements that come in from our business that we need to comply to, things like safety requirements or things that we need to put in place, for example. So it has really given us the visibility to do these improvements. So over the years, what we have today is definitely much different than what we have built a decade ago.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things that stands out is the fact that, now that you do have a standard process, it allows you to do change management at a much, more thorough level, right? Rather than having to go through and do, a rollout to each one of the different centers, separately. Changing something in the system, it manages to immediately roll out those changes to everybody. Is that something which, how much do you find yourself doing like training on those kinds of new, features that are rolled out, and how exactly does that work? Does it tend to be like smaller incremental things that you don't have to do a ton of, retraining on, or, what is kind of that threshold for continuing to roll new features out?
You're referring to like application stuff or Appian features?
I guess application stuff.
Application stuff. It depends. So over the years, the application has definitely grown. So I've been talking about a repair process, which is really our initial use case that we were trying to tackle with Appian. And what has happened is that the functionality, the improvements that we have introduced to the business really spread through word of mouth. For example, once we rolled out the repair process, or commercial team start using it, then our engineering team start learning about the benefits of what Appian was providing to our operations team, and then they basically want a piece of the pie, right? So they were like, hey, we want to have visibility between our departments too. We want to, we are part of the repair process, right? Like, they have their inputs on their side. They handle different technical support questions that our customers might have. So they're part of what our whole aftermarket department. And back then they were using like an email-based system where there was no way to track, there was no way to measure cycle time, things like that. So once they learn about what we have done through Appian, then we basically expanded the tool to also include them as part of the workflow. So in that perspective, that was a bigger iteration in our tool. So that required definitely retraining, definitely some sessions with the business to let them know what has changed and what is to be expected and things like that. Yeah. So, but aside from so that's an example where that was like a bigger change for our users. But we do have smaller improvements. A lot of them actually we have leveraged Appian to build more self-service tools for our business to be able to manage themselves nowadays. But there could be things like updating checklists that let's say our business might have a policy change that they need to update, and in order to do that update, they need to update something within the application. So in those cases, we have really given our business some flexibility to be able to make those changes themselves. And those things are more of the minor things that are iterating, on a day-to-day basis based on our business needs. Yeah. Okay. And so I guess you actually started to allude to another thing that I wanted to ask about, the difference between the changes to the application and then the changes to the platform. You've been in Appian or using Appian for a long time, and certainly, the product has changed a lot since you started using it. Like, what are some of the things that you have seen change over time,
with regard to that product, like, kind of the Appian platform, what are some of the big features that have been released that you found were helpful to you, or are there things that stuck out in your mind as things have kind of changed over time and just sort of the landscape of technology has changed that you found particularly helpful?
Yeah, so we have definitely went through many iterations. I think when we started, it was portals. We used that for a year or two. I can't remember now. Then we went to Tempo, and now we are using sites. The thing that definitely has stuck out to us is really the flexibility of the interfaces. So in the beginning, Appian was pretty restrictive in terms of how you can build out the forms, what type of components you can use, and the ability to make a form be more sexy in terms of UI was very limiting. So this has really improved drastically over the years. Now we can basically create a form any way that we want. The marketplace has been great. We've seen, now that you guys have the ability to create plugins, be able to fill in some of the use cases that maybe is not a universal enough for Appian to build in. That has been very interesting for us as well. So there's definitely a lot of things that I will say that, like, probably the biggest step is probably the ability to improve with UI and UX, which has been a pretty big thing for us. Has always been a big thing, but it's always one of those things that has been kind of an afterthought for us when we initially rolled out a system. And now that Appian has given us so much flexibility in doing, we're constantly going back to see how can we make this easier for users? How can we make our experience better?
Yeah, and definitely, Flowserve is a very data dense application, right? Like, it's a lot of information that needs to be displayed on the screen. It's a lot of like technical data as well, so it can be difficult to visualize, and trying to get something which is very clearly, to clearly understand what is happening in any part of the application can be something that's really tricky. I remember going through a lot of iterations back in the day of trying to figure out how to present, like, a list of parts and all of the different specifications for them, and like lists of steps that need to be completed for engineering and things like that. So for sure, being able to make a lot more flexible UI that is a lot more responsive is huge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Appian is going towards the right direction, like being like sites, for example. Tempo was great, but it was still very restrictive in the specific tab. Like I can't, like, there was like 5 tabs, like news, action, etc., and we couldn't really have much control over that. And with sites, we have complete control now, and we can tailor something that is more direct for our customers, basically, or users, because they don't want to spend time. Like we used to need to train them, hey, you have to click on this tab, go here, and actually get to the information that you need. Now we can design the page to have the information in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last, like, big question that I wanted to ask you before we go into any audience questions, and I'll say again, if anybody does have any questions in the audience, feel free to put them in the question and answer panel, and I'll get to them at the end. What were some of the, positive, like, extra outcomes or things that you didn't expect, as you were going through and building out an application? What were some of the things that you weren't expecting to get out of it that, happened as you were building out the different solutions?
I think it probably goes back to something that we touched on a little bit earlier, is just the potential of doing more improvements, of standardizing the process even further. So when we go in, we ask our stakeholders of business about what the process is, and I take the opportunity to standardize it already. But as we're building this out, it's actually showing them how it will function, how it will work. And as we're doing that, even beyond building it, right? Like it just opens it up. I say, hey, I'm looking at this. This is how we can improve the process, whether it is, let's say, reducing a few steps here, reducing a few steps there, moving this step before that step, things like that. It really has opened up door for further standardization.
Yeah, and I feel like I remember there also just being a lot more, being able to share things between teams, right? Because I remember when we were going, we had like a couple of different streams going. We had like the engineering portal team, we had like a field service team, and all of that kind of data being shared together in one place was definitely something which also to me at the time was a very big, or it seemed like a very big deal from my perspective, because that was the largest project like that I had worked with at the time. So it definitely seemed like it was a great use case for it, for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. We still get requests nowadays to talk about how each team's performance is affecting other teams. It's always interesting now that we have all the data in one place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. I think that goes through all the questions that I had. I did also, I'll share my screen again really quick. But I did see that there was one question that did come through here near the end. And so it's asking, how, or for it sounds like it's asking about the development like team makeup. So, at the beginning we were, very much kind of like in and doing a lot of the initial development. And so for the development that you're doing now, is that something which is all internal teams? And how did sort of like that transition work from, using sort of like consulting resources from us over to internal teams from Flowserve?
Yeah, so we have we have a couple of developers that's internal. So at Flowserve, we have this what we call the Insight team at Flowserve, where we have our center of excellence in terms of support for our IT organization. So within that organization, we have built up a few folks there that basically start from scratch. So we did not go out and hire Appian specific technical people. We started with people that understood technology, that were receptive in learning new technologies, and we have really grown our skill sets through that method instead. And from there we kind of grown our internal capabilities from with that method.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, Alberto, for joining. This is definitely a story that I have told about, just sort of the way to roll out Appian projects many times in the past. I think that it's a great example of the types of benefits that you can get out of, kind of embracing technology and embracing, automation. So thank you very much for joining us today. For everybody else that's on the line, thank you for joining us. This is one of the series that we do. And so this one, the How They Did It series, we have a number of other webinars that we have done in the past, which are up on our YouTube and our website. And we continue to do these kinds of presentations, periodically, once every month or two. And so definitely feel free to, follow along with us and, check out all of the different, webinars that we'll do in the future. And so, yeah, thank you very much for joining. Thank you again, Alberto and Andy, for joining us today. And yeah, have a good one, and have a good rest of the year.
Thank you.